The year's 39 CE, in the imperial palace on Rome's Palatine Hill, a dinner party is underway. The guests are senators, their wives dressed in silk and gold, men who rule provinces and command legions. At the head of the table sits Caligula, emperor for 2 years now, 27 years old. He's smiling. That should worry everyone in the room. During the first course, he points to a senator's wife. "Beautiful woman," he says to her husband. The senator nods nervously. Caligula continues, "I'm going to have her tonight. Here, actually, everyone can watch. Or would you prefer to leave first?" The room goes silent. The senator knows there's no right answer. If he objects, he dies. If he leaves, he's a coward. If he stays, he watches the emperor rape his wife. He stays. They all do. Because in Caligula's Rome, saying no wasn't an option. What you're about to witness isn't just the depravity of one mad emperor. It's what happens when absolute power combines with psychological damage, sexual compulsion, and political intelligence in a civilization with no limits except assassination. Caligula ruled for 4 years. In that time, he normalized sexual violence, destroyed families for entertainment, and pushed Roman tolerance to breaking point. If you've ever wondered how civilizations create monsters, you're in the right place. Here we examine the Roman historical sources written by senators who survived his reign, the archaeological evidence of his palace and its modifications, and the psychological question that haunts scholars. Was Caligula insane? Or was he the logical conclusion of absolute power without restraint? Every view helps us continue this work. Now let's follow Caligula from childhood trauma to imperial throne, because the path between them is paved with bodies and broken lives. The question isn't whether he was mad. It's whether madness matters when you control an empire. To understand Caligula, you must understand his childhood. Born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus in 12 CE, he was great-great-grandson of Augustus, son of the general Germanicus, who was loved by Rome's armies. His nickname Caligula meant little boot, because as a child he wore miniature military boots around his father's camps. It sounds charming. The reality was training him for a life he wouldn't survive intact. When Caligula was 7, his father died mysteriously, probably poisoned on orders of Emperor Tiberius, who saw Germanicus as a rival. When he was 19, Tiberius summoned him to Capri, the island where the emperor had retreated into a compound of sexual depravity that shocked even Romans. What happened to Caligula on Capri? The sources hint at but never fully describe. Suetonius, writing 70 years later from court records and eyewitness accounts, says that Tiberius kept beautiful young boys and girls in the villa, that he had them perform sex acts for his entertainment, that he particularly enjoyed violating youths of both sexes. He also says that young Caligula survived 6 years on Capri by never showing emotion, never protesting, doing whatever was required. Think about what that means. From age 19 to 25, Caligula lived in a compound where the emperor of Rome committed sexual acts that would be crimes today, where Caligula's own survival depended on compliance, on learning to perform, on understanding that his body wasn't his own. When Tiberius died in 37 CE and the Senate made Caligula emperor, they were crowning a man who had been systematically traumatized for 6 years. For the first 6 months, Caligula seemed fine. Better than fine. He recalled political exiles. A fever, probably meningitis or encephalitis based on symptom descriptions. He was unconscious for days. When he recovered, something had changed. The man who woke up wasn't the man who had fallen ill. Suetonius attributes this to brain damage from the fever. Modern neurologists agree that meningitis can cause personality changes, impulse control problems, and hypersexuality. But some historians argue that Caligula had always been damaged. That illness just removed whatever controls he'd learned to maintain. Either way, the Caligula who emerged from that fever was the one history remembers. The first sign was how he treated his sisters. Roman emperors came from families where intermarriage was common to keep bloodlines pure. But Caligula took it further. He had 3 sisters: Agrippina, Drusilla, and Livilla. According to multiple sources, he had sexual relations with all 3. But Drusilla was his favorite. Suetonius describes their relationship as closer than sibling affection. They were caught in bed together multiple times during adolescence. As emperor, Caligula treated Drusilla as co-ruler, gave her honors typically reserved for empresses, and according to some sources, planned to marry her formally and have children despite their blood relation. When she died suddenly in 38 CE, possibly pregnant with his child, Caligula's grief was so extreme, he ordered the empire into mourning and had her deified. But after Drusilla's death, something in Caligula snapped completely. He began using his remaining sisters in ways that historians struggle to describe without explicit language. He would prostitute them. Actually prostitute them. He would invite senators and wealthy men to the palace, introduce his sisters, and set prices for their services. The money wasn't the point. He was rich beyond measure. The point was humiliation. Power demonstrating itself by degrading the most noble women in Rome. Think about what this means psychologically. A man whose sisters were probably his sexual victims now forcing them to have sex with strangers for money they didn't need while he watched. This isn't simple cruelty. It's complex psychological torture that suggests deep damage. But Caligula was just warming up. Let's talk about what he did to married couples, because this is where his sexual depravity merged with political terror in ways that paralyzed Rome's elite. He would attend dinner parties at senators' homes, see a beautiful wife, and simply take her. Sometimes to another room, sometimes publicly. The husband would watch, knowing that objection meant death. The wife would submit, knowing that resistance was futile. But that wasn't the worst part. After using the woman, Caligula would return her to her husband and critique her performance. Publicly, in front of other guests, he would describe what they had done, rate her enthusiasm, compare her to previous conquests. The humiliation was as much the point as the act itself. Cassius Dio, a senator and historian who had access to senatorial records, describes multiple cases. One senator's wife was so beautiful that Caligula divorced his current wife and married her, then divorced her 3 months later after describing her inadequacies to the Senate. Another senator watched his wife raped during a dinner party, and when he later committed suicide, Caligula seized his property and gave it to the woman as payment for services rendered. The message was clear. Nothing was private. No one was protected. Your wife, your daughter, your own body if he wanted it, all belonged to the emperor. This wasn't just sexual indulgence. This was terror as governance. As long as senators never knew who would be next, they couldn't organize resistance. Caligula also developed what sources describe as a brothel inside the imperial palace. He would take noble women, and some men, force them to work as prostitutes, and invite wealthy Romans to visit. The customers would pay exorbitant prices to have sex with senators' daughters and patricians' wives. The money went into the imperial treasury, though Caligula certainly didn't need it. The point was degradation. The point was demonstrating that aristocratic blood meant nothing against imperial power. One documented case involved the daughter of a former consul. She was 16, engaged to be married. Caligula had her seized, brought to the palace, and put to work in his brothel. When her father tried to negotiate her release, Caligula invited him to be her first customer. The father refused and fled Rome. Caligula had him declared an enemy of the state. The daughter, sources disagree on her fate. Some say she was killed. Others say she killed herself. Either way, she disappeared. But Caligula's sexual depravity wasn't limited to women. He had male lovers too, and used them with equal cruelty. One favorite was a pantomime actor named Nestor, famous for playing female roles. Caligula became obsessed with him, had him brought to the palace, and kept him essentially imprisoned there. When Nestor tried to refuse the emperor's attentions, Caligula had him publicly beaten until he agreed. The relationship was public. Caligula would attend Nestor's performances and afterward take him in front of the audience. Rome watched an emperor have sex with an actor on stage after theatrical performances. This was unprecedented. Even Tiberius had been discreet. Caligula seemed determined to violate every sexual norm Rome had. Now let's talk about what Caligula did during military campaigns, because he took his sexual practices with him when he left Rome. In 3940 CE, he led legions to Gaul and Germany, ostensibly to campaign against Germanic tribes. What he actually did was stage theatrical victories, waste enormous amounts of money, and turn the campaign into a mobile sexual circus. He brought his current wife, Caesonia, who was pregnant with his child. He also brought a train of prostitutes, actors, and beautiful young men collected from conquered territories. Every night, the imperial tent hosted orgies that scandalized even hardened legionaries. Soldiers described seeing the emperor with multiple partners simultaneously while issuing military orders. The message was clear. Even warfare was subordinate to his desires. One particularly disturbing incident involved the wife of a Germanic chieftain who had surrendered. Caligula had her brought to his tent, raped her in front of her husband and children, then sent her back to them. The humiliation was designed to break the chief's spirit. It worked. The man killed himself that night. Caligula thought this was hilarious. When Caligula returned to Rome, he brought dozens of Germanic captives. The attractive ones were distributed among his sexual courtiers. The rest were used in gladiatorial games. Some sources suggest that captives who refused Caligula's advances were sent directly to the arena, death as punishment for denying him. By 40 CE, Rome was terrified. Senators sent their beautiful wives and daughters out of the city. Men avoided the palace. The economy suffered because no one wanted to draw imperial attention through too much success. Caligula responded by demanding nobles present their wives at court for inspection. This was theoretically to honor them. Everyone understood it was for him to select new victims. The final straw was what he did to the Vestal Virgins. These priestesses maintained Rome's sacred fire and were supposed to remain chaste for 30 years of service. Violating a Vestal was sacrilege punishable by being buried alive. Caligula didn't care. He pursued several Vestals, demanding they submit to him. When one refused, he had her accused of breaking her vows and buried alive anyway, then joked that at least now she wasn't a virgin. This was too much even for Romans who had tolerated incest, rape, and prostitution. The Vestals were sacred. Violating them wasn't just crime. It was cosmic violation. Support for Caligula collapsed. The only question was who would move first. On January 24, 41 CE, a conspiracy of Praetorian Guard officers, led by Cassius Chaerea, who Caligula had repeatedly mocked for supposed effeminacy, ambushed the emperor in an underground passage of the palace. They stabbed him 30 times. They killed his wife Caesonia. They killed his infant daughter by smashing her head against a wall. They wanted to eliminate his entire line. Caligula was 29 years old. He had ruled for 4 years. In that time, he had normalized sexual violence, destroyed families, prostituted noblewomen, violated sacred priestesses, and turned imperial power into systematic sexual terror. His body was partially cremated and hastily buried. Later, his sisters had him exhumed and properly cremated. Even in death, his family tried to preserve some dignity. The Senate tried to erase him. They passed damnatio memoriae, official condemnation that meant his name would be chiseled off inscriptions, his images destroyed, his reign forgotten. It didn't work. The historians remembered. The victims remembered. Rome remembered. The legacy of Caligula is complicated. Was he insane? Almost certainly by modern psychiatric standards. Brain damage from meningitis could explain impulse control issues and hypersexuality. But psychological damage from childhood on Capri probably contributed too. Trauma victims often recreate their trauma on others. Caligula had been sexually used by Tiberius. As emperor, he sexually used everyone else. But insanity doesn't fully explain it. Some of Caligula's acts showed calculation, political intelligence, an understanding of how sexual humiliation could control opposition. Forcing senators to watch him rape their wives wasn't random violence. It was systematically breaking their will to resist. That requires planning, not just madness. Modern historians debate whether Caligula's depravity was as extreme as sources describe. Suetonius and Dio wrote decades later, possibly exaggerating for political reasons. But multiple independent sources described similar acts. The archaeological evidence of palace modifications, including the brothel rooms and underground passages where he was killed, confirms physical spaces existed for the activities described. What's undeniable is that Caligula pushed Roman tolerance to breaking point. Rome was not a prudish society. Emperors having lovers of both genders was normal. But Caligula's systematic sexual violence, his violation of sacred taboos, his use of rape as political control, this was different. This was power without any restraint creating horror. You've just witnessed 4 years of systematic sexual terror disguised as imperial rule. If this disturbs you, good. It should. Caligula is often dismissed as simply crazy. But his reign shows what happens when absolute power meets damaged psychology. The result isn't random chaos. It's calculated cruelty. If you want to understand how power corrupts, how trauma creates trauma, subscribe and join us. Comment what shocked you most about Caligula. And remember, he wasn't ancient history. He was 29 when he died, younger than many watching this. Given absolute power, he created 4 years of sexual nightmare. The Roman Empire survived him, but Rome never forgot what unchecked power could become. The ruins of his palace still exist beneath the Palatine Hill. Archaeologists have found the underground passages where he was killed, the rooms where he prostituted noblewomen, the spaces where he demonstrated that in imperial Rome, nothing was sacred and no one was safe. The stones remember. We should too.